But there are kind of other cases where knowing the amount of data you need to look at before you make a decision is quite important. Actually, one of them is in kind of game show scenario. Some of you may know this this game show Deal or No Deal, where there are 20, well, in this case, 26 boxes. Each one contains a particular sum of money, and you open the boxes in turn, and then you have to make a decision about which box you're going to stick with. Now, what if I actually changed this and I didn't tell you the sums of money that were in the box? So we removed knowledge about the sums of money. So actually, you've just got 26 boxes, and you don't know how much money is in the boxes. There could be a box with £1 million, or just a box with maximum of £5. How many boxes do you need to open to be able to get a good sense of what the data set looks like, so that you can really optimize stopping on a box and being confident that you've got a good chance of having got the maximum prize? This is actually quite similar in some ways to problems that we're all faced with every day in our kind of lives. If you're looking for a new flat, for example, to rent or to buy, and you start looking at one flat after the other, then, you know, after a while, you're going to have to make a decision, and perhaps you get worried. The first flat you saw was absolutely fantastic. Is anything going to beat that flat? But you feel you need to see more data to be able to make the call, or looking for a restaurant, for example, or even finding a mate for life. We have girlfriends, boyfriends as we grow up, and then at some point we sort of feel we need to perhaps make a commitment. But perhaps the first person you go out with is just amazing, but you sort of get unnerved that you need to see more data. So actually, maths can help you in this kind of challenge, because it turns out that maths gives you a way to understand the percentage of boxes that you need to see to give yourself the best chance of getting the best box that's out there. And it involves probably the second most popular number in mathematics. So certainly the first most popular number one of the number list in mathematics is pi, to do with circles. But second on the list is probably this number e, which is 2.71828 and goes off to infinity with no patterns. This is quite a lot to do with kind of logarithms, exponential growth, and things like that. But this number is actually the key to knowing how much data you need to see before you make a decision. So it turns out you need to do the proportion of 1 divided by e of the amount of boxes, and to see those first of all. So that turns out to be about 37%. So you need to see 37% of the boxes. And then after that point, you must choose the box that beats all the boxes you've seen up to that point, and that's the box you should settle on. Turns out 1 in 3 times that will guarantee you the best box that's available. So it can't guarantee you 100%, but the best you can do is that 1 in 3, and you need to see 1 over e, 37% of the boxes to be able to make the best choice. So e is your shortcut to playing Deal or No Deal, or finding your partner in life, which one will be the best. So certainly shortcuts in trying to understand data is going to be really important as we go into this data rich world that we live in. Another one that's I found really extremely helpful, both in how I do my mathematics and in everyday life, is choosing the best way to depict the challenge that you're being faced with. And this is the diagram shortcut. I think sometimes, shortcuts sometimes makes people think, oh, are you cutting corners? Because cutting corners is not really what I want to do. If I'm building a house, I don't want to cut corners because the house might fall down. So I want to make it clear that shortcuts are getting to the destination, not in a shoddy way, but getting the true answer, but in the most fast and efficient way possible. Now, the interesting thing about a diagram is often that a good diagram will often throw away a lot of information. So sometimes information is not so important, and the decision is about, well, what information do I need to look at in order to be able to solve this problem? If I throw too much away, maybe I'm cutting corners and I don't solve the problem. So the best diagrams kind of are in that sweet spot between throwing away too much information that's cluttering what's going on, but not so much that you're ending up cutting corners and not finding out what you really want to do. One of the most powerful diagrams, which had such a political impact on the world and really illustrated the power of the visual to depict a complex problem, was the famous rose diagram, which was drawn by Florence Nightingale. She was trying to explain to politicians back in London during the Crimean War that the solution to why so many soldiers were dying out in the Crimean. Obviously, there was a lot of deaths from being shot out in the battlefield. But these diagrams that she produced in this kind of rose diagram, sort of like a pie chart, the black and red ones were casualties coming from actual deaths in battle, etc. But it's the blue ones that were most interesting, because these turned out to be deaths from in hospital, deaths that Florence Nightingale realized could be avoided, because once the sanitation committee came and cleaned up these hospitals, what she saw was a dramatic drop in the number of deaths in hospitals. So the diagram on the right of your screen is the kind of first year of the Crimean War. On the left is the second year, and you can see just that the blue petals in this row diagram have completely shrunk. And this was her way to try and explain to government that sanitation was the key to saving lives. And she tried to persuade people by writing things, by speeches, but it was this visual impact of seeing just the collapse in size of these blue petals due to the impact of cleaning up the hospitals that finally convinced politicians to take this seriously. And this is really one of the first examples of kind of bar chart or pie chart, visualizing, using visuals to actually look at data. It's interesting that, yeah, so I think that the key here is throwing away information. You don't want to know about who these people are, exactly which hospitals. It's just the numbers. And sometimes, you know, you can say, well, I don't want to throw away all this information. I want to include as much information as possible. And the fallacy here in including too much information in a diagram is that you can fall into the trap of actually just trying to recreate the thing that you're trying to create a diagram of. And my favorite example of this is one of Lewis Carroll's books. This is a map that was produced by this country. So it describes, it's called Sylvie and Bruno Concluded. Well, we actually made a map of the country on the scale of a mile to the mile. Have you used it much? Well, it's never been spread out yet. The farmers objected. They said it would cover the whole country and shut out the sunlight. So we now use the country itself as its own map. And I assure you, it does nearly as well. So Lewis Carroll's kind of illustrates that, you know, the point about maps and a good diagram is not to replicate information, but to throw away information, but to leave yourself with with what is actually telling you what you want to know. So again, the challenge is, what is your destination and what is the best diagram to achieve that destination? And I think science has come up with some extraordinarily brilliant diagrams, for example, to understand the very big and the very small. Copernicus's sun-centered solar system just so perfectly captured in the many pages that he wrote in his book explaining his new theory. Here's the solar system in just a ring of concentric circles, not representing the actual radius of the planets, and they're not perfect circles anyway, but the idea is captured in that diagram. And then these diagrams of small molecular structure. Any chemistry lab will have diagrams with lots of letters and lines coming out of it. Physics, to understand what's happening with these fundamental particles, matter and antimatter interacting. You've got these little Feynman diagrams, which were diagrams that were produced by Feynman to try and explain hugely complex mathematical calculations that people were getting lost in. But these diagrams just helped shortcut the way to understand these calculations. So beautiful how diagrams can be used to represent the universe, if we want, and also the very small. But you have to be very careful with diagrams because they can be abused, because you're sort of throwing away information or representing information in a pictorial form. I mean, Descartes always said sense perceptions are sense deceptions. So you need to be very careful about a picture of your data. So here are a couple of examples. The diagrams on the left are a very famous set of diagrams that were used to explain the impact that certain tax cuts were going to have in America in 2012, 2013. And a news outlet, won't say which one it is, but very naughtily expressed the impact of these changes that they would have on the system with these two diagrams. The diagram on the left of the left is the one that was used in the news outlet, which makes it look like a huge difference between now and January 2013. Look at the big difference between those two bar charts. But actually, the naughty thing is, if you look on the axis, it starts at 34%, 36%, 38, 40%. If you actually put these on an axis which starts at 0, suddenly the difference is much less significant. 33 to 39.6 just doesn't look as major a change as the diagram without starting at 0. So you need to be very careful about how you represent data. The other one I kind of think is very often done is if you're trying to, for example, illustrate that the profits of business C in the diagram on the right, well, they're so much bigger than the profits of business B or business A. Yeah, certainly the height of that square is representing the difference, but the diagram has rather naughtily also expanded the width as well. So it looks like if you look at the area of that square representing profits of company C, it looks enormous compared to company A. And in fact, you need 25 copies of that square corresponding to company A to cover the profits of company C. But actually, you're only saying it's 5 times more, not 25 times more. So there again is a kind of dangerous way of representing data. Weirdly, actually, I think Florence Nightingale kind of made a mistake with her rose diagram by actually putting it in a circle, because she represented deaths by area, which is spreading out both away from the rose and spreading out sideways. And she would have had actually more of an impact had she done it as a bar chart rather than that rose diagram, because she was trying to represent how much blue the deaths were cut by, and by actually making it area, she sort of actually belittled the impact by doing that, curiously, but it still had the right sort of impact. So I think finding a very good visual way to represent your data, throwing away what isn't needed, is really important. And in fact, that's sort of the key to one of my favorite shortcuts I'm going to take you to, which is shortcuts trying to understand networks. Again, I think this is one of the kind of challenges of our modern age, is many things are networks. The internet is a network. The way a company structure works is a kind of network, and we're trying to sort of navigate the best way around these kind of networks. The internet, we've got this wonderful shortcut called Google, which uses a clever bit of mathematics as a shortcut to be able to find those websites that you're interested in. So it's something called eigenvalues of matrices, but this clever piece of mathematics put inside this algorithm means that when you put in a search term, Google will find you the websites you're interested in. But one of the first kind of analyses of networks that I really love was a challenge that the 17th century, 18th century citizens of Konigsberg, a small little town in Prussia that has the river Pregel running through it. There are 2 parts of the river which come together at the town of Konigsberg, there's an island in the middle where the University of Konigsberg was, where Kant very famously studied. And then the Pregel joins to make one river, which goes out to the Baltic to the left. And there were 7 bridges that were crossing from the island in the middle, across to the town in the north, town in the south. And one of the challenges the citizens of Königsberg used to indulge in was, well, of a Sunday afternoon, they would set themselves the challenge of, can I find my way around all 7 bridges and come back to where I started at, having crossed each bridge once and once only? And they kept on trying this challenge, and every time they did it, they would find that there was one bridge left over that they hadn't gone over. But they just felt, well, maybe there's so many different ways to walk these bridges. Maybe we've missed a way that will solve this problem. But it took one of the great mathematicians of all time, Leonhard Euler, one of the great shortcutters, to come and understand this problem and realize that it's kind of the geometry of the town is sort of unimportant. There is a diagram underlying the town which helps you to understand whether this problem of crossing all the bridges is possible or not. So what he did was to condense each piece of land into just a single point. So the north of the town is condensed into the point A, the island is B, south of the town C, the part of the river that's surrounded by the 2 rivers coming in is land D. And then here are the bridges which connect each of these pieces of land, 7 bridges. And the challenge is, can I walk around these bridges? That's the same as the challenge of, can I draw this picture without taking my pen off the paper and not running over a line twice? What Euler realized was there is a shortcut to answering this problem. Whenever you go into a point on your journey, say, you go in on one line, you've got to go out on a line you haven't drawn yet. So every time you go into a point, you've got to go out on another line. That means that most of the time you're building up an even number of bridges out of all of the points. There's only 2 places where you're allowed an odd number of bridges. That's where you start. The point where you start just has 1 bridge coming out, and potentially where you finish, 1 bridge going in. So you can have 2 places where they're an odd number, or actually maybe no places because maybe you start and end at the same place. Well, look at this diagram here. At A, I've got 1, 2, 3 bridges coming out. D, I've got 1, 2, 3 bridges. C, I've got 1, 2, 3 bridges. That's already 3 odd places. And B, I've got 5 bridges. So this diagram cannot be drawn by taking your pen and running over all the lines once and once only without taking your pen off the paper, because there are too many points with odd number of bridges coming out. And the beauty of these shortcuts is that even if I make the problem incredibly complex, say I now get you to just draw an incredibly complicated diagram with lots of bridges. In fact, I talk in the book about a challenge of running over the bridges in Bristol, where there are about 50 or something bridges, and being able to know whether you can cross all the bridges and come back to where you started at is only possible because you can apply this trick. You just need to look and see, are there only 2 places with an odd number of bridges coming out? And you can now look, actually, I went to Koenigsberg, which is now modern day Kaliningrad. A lot of the bridges got bombed during the Second World War. Few are still left. Few new built bridges. There's a dual carriageway running across, a railway bridge. But it turns out there are now, again, 7 bridges. But when I went there, this new diagram that you would draw describing the new configuration, turns out you can walk the bridges of modern day Kaliningrad. So I think that understanding shortcuts in networks is really important. And there's a way actually to create shortcuts in networks. You probably heard of this thing called the 6 degrees of separation, that the network of friends in the world, that you can get from one friend to anybody else in the world with just 6 degrees of separation. Somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody will connect 2 people in the world with just 6 friendship links. And people were very curious about why is this true? It turns out these networks of friendships have a particular quality about them. A network has a fast way of getting from one place to the other if, first of all, there are a lot of local connections. So a lot of people you know around you, But then you just need a few global connections, which take, I know somebody, for example, in Canada, and that global connection will help to link up my local connections with the local ones in Canada. And it turns out that diagrams which have lots of local connections, but a few global links across the whole network will have this extraordinary property that you can get from one place to the other with just a small number of links. And this is very important. If you actually want to create a network where you can get quickly from one place to the other, what you need to do is to combine these local connections with a few global ones, and you'll get a very efficient network. And it turns out that the brain probably is doing something similar, that we have a lot of local and neuronal connections and then a few global strands. If you look at sort of a neuronal network, you'll see these long neurons across the brain. And the brain seems to be tapping into this, what's called the small world property of networks, to be able to create a brain where you can have a neuron firing and quickly get to another neuron to be able to assess what's going on in a situation. In fact, this is a picture of Gauss's brain. Gauss is actually one of the companions in this book that I take from that childhood episode in the classroom right through to his death. Gauss is really the master of the shortcut. Every shortcut I talked about in the book, he seemed to have some kind of a finger in the pie. And when they analyzed Gauss's brain afterwards, they found that it was more convoluted, more connected than any other brain in the Göttingen specimens. So it seems like his brain was sort of programmed for shortcuts. And in fact, I talked to a neuroscientist who said that the best brains that solve problems are ones that don't think too much. They're able to connect the frontal cortex to other parts of the brain without thinking really too much. And actually, that conversation with that neuroscientist is one of a number of conversations I had, which sort of form little pit stops on our journey through the book. I wanted to talk to people from other professions to find out what their shortcuts were, whether they were similar to the shortcuts that I used in mathematics. Maybe there are some things you can't shortcut, like learning to become an international cellist, like Natalie Klein. Maybe you don't want to do shortcuts because Robert McFarlane, he's a walker. He likes taking a long time to get from A to B, but he told me an interesting shortcut that he made to get off a mountain very quickly because he needed to get off because he was about to be benighted, and he used an avalanche as a shortcut. Some of the shortcuts I did recognize. Brent Hoberman, he's the founder of lastminute.com. He used kind of breaking the law a little bit, pushing things to the edge as a tactic, a shortcut. And I certainly see that, we often quite like breaking things in mathematics. Square root of -1, that kind of breaks a rule, yet create an incredible shortcut. And Susie Orbach also helped me understand shortcuts and when they aren't possible in therapy. But I wanted to end just with a little story. The end of the book is about the power of mathematics to actually understand sometimes when there are no shortcuts. And that's also sometimes important. If you're faced with a problem, don't spend time trying to find a shortcut if there isn't one. So the classic one is the traveling salesman problem. A little bit like that network of the Konigsberg, but now I'm trying to find a way around this map. This is a map I made of Glastonbury Festival. Luke mentioned that I did some work with Glastonbury. I like to go around all the stages at some point. Here's a map. What's the fastest way to visit all the stages and return back to where I do my gig often at the Astrolabe Theatre? Turns out that there isn't a shortcut to this, we think. And it's one of a problem that's open. We believe there are no shortcuts, but how do you prove there's no shortcut beyond trying all the different possibilities and finding the shortest? So it's a problem called NP versus P, and it's got $1 million prize to it. And the challenge is, can you find a reason why there are no shortcuts to this problem? So that's the secret to finding the treasure in this map, to prove there are no shortcuts. But anyway, I end with Gauss. And, as I said at the beginning, the point about shortcuts is to arrive somewhere so you can do something interesting and not spend time doing boring, hard work. And very often, for me, I love trying to come up with these shortcuts. They can take a long time. And Gauss, very famously towards the end of his life, said, it's not knowledge, but the act of learning not possession, but the act of getting there, which grants the greatest enjoyment. When I've clarified and exhausted a subject, then I turn away from it in order to go into darkness again. The never satisfied man is so strange. If he's completed a structure, it's not in order to dwell in it peacefully, but in order to begin another. I imagine the world conqueror must feel thus, who, after one kingdom is scarcely conquered, stretches out his arms for others. So I hope this book and the evening you spent with me at the How To Academy will give you a suite of shortcuts to be able to get you to that place where you can venture out and conquer the new things that you're excited to do. So thank you very much.